Well, hello and welcome to day 2 of the 12 days of articles in review. My name is Mary Coughlin. I'm a neonatal nurse practitioner and the president and founder of Caring Essentials Collaborative. So yesterday's article, I hope you all enjoyed it, found it really interesting. And today I'm going to really kind of pick up on the momentum of setting the stage for some of the physiological underpinnings that are maybe predetermining some of this pathophysiology, morbidity, and mortality that we're seeing in adult survivors of premature birth. Today's article, I've written it over here in the chat, was published in January of this year by Lammertink et al. And it is describing premature birth and the developmental programming mechanisms of resilience and vulnerability. It's an open source paper, so I've got the link in there. I absolutely recommend that you check this paper out. It is in depth and intense, but brilliant, if I do say so myself. And so what I'm going to do, because it's such a lengthy article, I'm going to kind of hit the highlights for you and then really entreat you to check out the paper and read it. So what the authors have done is they've really compiled a nice flow, presenting all of the underlying physiologic, developmental milestones and points of vulnerability and sensitivity to stress in the NICU. They open up in their introduction just really highlighting that preterm infants are born, and we know this, neurobiologically immature, but are precociously exposed to stressful procedures throughout their NICU, PICU, or CICU experience. And this protracted exposure to stress has an impact on their regulatory mechanisms, and particularly the stress mechanisms, right? There's definitely an overexposure to unanticipated stress that can derail healthy development. And they do call out, just as I had shared in the paper yesterday, how this precocious exposure to toxic stress or trauma permanently alters neuroendocrine, autonomic, cardiovascular, and neural responses that then lead to mental morbidity and as well as physiologic morbidity throughout the lifespan. So how the authors have set up the paper is they first kind of identify sources of stress after preterm birth. And that's really brilliant. And it actually makes me think about presenting a paper that talks about some of the concerns regarding intrauterine exposure to stress that we also need to be cognizant of as we embrace this paradigm of trauma-informed care. But I digress. Let's get back to the Lammertink paper. So they identify sources of stress after preterm birth, and specifically they focus on the physical stress, obviously, that these individuals experience, the procedures, those life-saving procedures that they must endure in order to survive. But we need to kind of understand how that stress plays out in them physiologically to then, be open to how we can modify, mitigate, or buffer those experiences. There are acute life-saving procedures. There's, the chronic procedures like heel sticks, ventilation, intubation, suctioning, passing, feeding tubes, all that kind of stuff, not to mention other experiences that these individuals endure. Other sources of stress that we're very familiar with, is that exposure to the environment, right? Light and sound, olfaction, olfactory exposure, and even gustatory exposures, tactile exposure. So really appreciating that environmental source of stress. And then, of course, the stress of atypical, this is how the authors describe it, atypical maternal care. Other researchers also use this term, that in the NICU, these individuals, due to their critical illness, are separated from their mother, and they experience long periods of that separation, which, as I mentioned yesterday, is the #1 trauma experience endured by a neonate across all mammalian species. So we have to think about that as an additional source of stress for these individuals. And in the paper, you'll find they've got some really cool graphs that I don't know if I can actually share with my screen here. Let me see if I know how to do it. I'm going to just do this real quick, if it's going to let me. Window, this. Okay, I'm going to show you this. So this was just a really cool additional piece of information. I'm visual auditory learner. And so it really helps me to kind of get a grasp on what we're talking about when we're looking at all of these different systems that contribute to the infant's capacity to manage stress, right? That neuroregulatory capacity to handle life, the world around them. And so this really just kind of highlights all of the different systems that are part of that neuroregulatory mechanism. So autonomic nervous system, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, an area called the salience network, which includes the insular cortex, the amygdala, and some other structures, executive control network, parasympathetic nervous system, sympathetic nervous system, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal glands, hippocampus, all of these different neurobiological regions are rapidly developing during the embryonic and fetal periods. And actually what they're discovering in their research is that many of them do have limited functional capacity. So premature infants are coming to us, most of them are coming, you can see this little grayed out window here, although we are pushing this margin down a bit, right? But we can still see that many of these systems then are laid out, right? They're ready to handle well, they're not ready to handle it, right? They are functional, but what the authors go on to help us understand, let me just stop sharing now. I think I can do that. Yeah, oh, cool, okay. What the authors are helping us understand though is just like, just like all of our experiences help us adapt, right? Like individuals learn what it is to be human by their exposure to other humans. And so we have these structures in place that then respond to the stimuli that are presented to the individual, to the organism. And so how this individual experiences the external stimuli inform the regulation or the regulatory capacity of their biological substrates. I hope that makes some sense. So the authors go on to kind of really lay out, I like this paper because it's really thoughtful in digging deep into that biology. That really helps me then understand it very deeply and then understand some of the strategies that we can employ to mitigate that trauma. Hey, Jackie, nice to see you. Thanks for joining me. You're going to love this paper. So then they go on to kind of delineate then the pre and postnatal brain development of stress systems and brain networks. So this, again, just really helps us get a broader understanding of all of the systems and all of the layers that are involved. This took me so deep into neurobiology. I was delighted. Really kind of helped me thread together a lot of the work that I've read about polyvagal theory and really understanding how that is connected with these other brain networks. And that the response to stress and trauma isn't just like flip this switch for that and this switch for that. It's a very integrated, complex response, and we need to understand that. And we also need to understand that most of our patients, right, they don't come with little stickers on their forehead saying, I'm resilient, I'm fragile. We have to anticipate, or we have to expect rather, that many of these people are going to be vulnerable. Many of these people are going to be super sensitive. Many of these experiences are going to have neurobiological impact on them. So I think you'll love this section of the paper that really dives deep into the biology of these stress systems and brain networks, talking about the autonomic nervous system. I'm just kind of scrolling through the highlights. HPA axis, right? And really connecting that with the autonomic nervous system. So we can see that marriage, understanding these stress-related neural networks. So that's when we start talking about the default mode network and the what is it called? The salience network, which is the cingulate cortex, the insular cortex, the amygdala, and that sort of thing. And then, and these are all subcortical structures. So it's, again, just really important for us to understand the complexity of these systems and how they are impacted by stress. For me, this was eye-opening, and I think that you will really have the same response to the material, because I think we have, at least in my education, it was a very superficial understanding of the biology of stress. It was HPA axis, cortisol, and that's it, but never really understanding the cascading impact that it has on other developing brain structures in utero and postnatally as well. So I like the amount of detail that they go in here. And then they kind of like recap and bring us to some of the current research that has looked at the influence of stress on the developing brain using functional MRI. So they talk about neonatal stress and brain development. And the one study they reference in here was the study that looked at the neonatal infant stressor scale. I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with that scale. It was initially published, I think it was either 2011, maybe 2009, 2011, maybe by Smith et al. And they developed this really cool tool to quantify the stress exposures of babies in the first 2 weeks of life in the NICU. And then they did brain imaging, pre and post. And what they found was that the higher number of tick marks that babies had on their stress score sheet, the more correlation they had with changes that represented functional and anatomic impact of those stressors. So really good paper. And then authors subsequently have updated that paper, right? Updated the tool. And I think it's really helpful to give folks that in the moment awareness that, holy moly, this is a stressor. I need to really be aware of the implications of what's about to unfold for this baby and prepare this baby appropriately, make sure that I'm using non-FAM or FAM, whatever is appropriate interventions to mitigate or manage the pain and or stress that is associated with this experience. So I like how they're kind of laying out the biology, then they're sharing some of the research that draws this all together. And then they actually dove into the mechanisms underlying later life resilience and vulnerability following prematurity. So it's kind of setting the stage for us to understand maybe a little more deeply the pathway to the morbidities and the mortality that I presented in the paper yesterday. So again, these mechanisms, again, the same players, right? Autonomic nervous system, and they an exhaustive literature review within the paper, just giving them that emphasis that this is wicked important. This is substantiated HPA axis information, which we're all super familiar with as well. And then the newer information about epigenetic pathways and how these epigenetic pathways certainly contribute and inform neurobiological network development as well. They go into a lot of the really great research that's been done by Monterosi, by Oberlander, I think it is, and other really cool scientists interested in the epigenetics associated with preterm birth and the NICU experience. Let's see. And then they get into, because so many of these individuals are super vulnerable for psychopathology and mental health and behavioral health challenges down the road, they start bringing in some information then that was relatively new to me about these disruptions in neural equilibrium and emotion processing and its connection with executive functioning. So again, I think you've got to check this paper out. I think it's really going to help you understand why this idea of trauma-informed care is so critically important. And when they summate their information, they talk about opportunities for early intervention. And I love that they mention NIDCAP as a key intervention, as a key strategy. And and we've got a really great partnership with the NIDCAP Federation International. We are now collaborators, which is really cool. They endorse our work for trauma-informed care as it aligns with the mission of preserving and protecting the developmental integrity of these individuals as best as we possibly can, and the families, of course, as well. So opportunities for early intervention really revolve around our understanding that these individuals are in a high stress situation with a dramatically reduced exposure to comfort measures, right? And what does a brand new human being need? I mean, it's biologically relevant, continuous comfort, right? Continuous reassurance, continuous proximity, both emotionally and physically, with a loving human being, with that parent figure, that primary caregiver. So in the this section, then they kind of make the connections between the biology and then the strategies that can really help mitigate and cultivate resilience for these individuals. And I just want to show you, do one more screen share, because this graphic is absolutely brilliant that I think you're going to absolutely love. Let me just come back over here. Screen share. Give me one sec. Here we go. Now it's too big for me to, well, I suppose I could make it smaller, but I'm not going to make it small because I'm going to be able to see it. Okay. So I like how they've kind of got this organized, they've got the immature brain in the middle with the vulnerability and the resilience on the side, showing all of those neurobiological networks, organ systems and stuff like that, that are influencing the immature brain's physiology, right? Biology. And then you can see, again, I'm scrolling down. I hope you can still see this, you guys. So we've got the postnatal stress, and that arrow is up, right? And it's extremely up, and the postnatal comfort is markedly diminished. But if we can flip that arrow around, because we can mitigate and manage that postnatal stress, right? There are things that we can do. We can give provide non-pharmacal interventions. We can provide pharmacological strategies or interventions. But at the end of the day, and those are really important, but at the end of the day, what this little individual is really suffering from is extreme isolation, extreme loneliness, and that kills human beings. We see that in the geriatric patient population. We also see it in the neonatal patient population, and to be honest, everywhere in between. We're seeing that as a consequence of our COVID interventions, right? These individuals losing their will to live because of the isolation and that sort of thing. So we need to understand how that experience, that emotional experience, affects your biology. And so they've got these balls here of bonding, sensory stimulation, family rooms. Those are small strategies that encompass a lot of possibilities, right? A lot of opportunities for us to mitigate the stress and understand, I think understanding the biology gives us that awareness that we can speak to the need for these individuals scientifically, coherently, and then bring our compassion through that science, right? We are not just these machines. We are these beautiful, complex organisms that are a compilation of complex systems and complex emotions, feelings, and existential realities that we need to bring together to really fully support an optimal, ideal developmental trajectory. And I mentioned this yesterday. I'm going to mention it again today. The work that we do isn't just about survival, right? Yes, we want these individuals to survive. We want them to survive, thrive, and flourish. And that's what we can do when we understand the biology of trauma, and that information, that biology informs us, right? That's trauma-informed care. Once I am informed of the biological consequences, the psychobiological consequences of your experience, and then I am armed with the information I need to show up compassionately, completely, holistically, and serve all of your needs, not just your disease. So, pop any questions that you have in the box, but you must read this article. It is absolutely, I think it should be a prerequisite for anybody caring for premature or critically ill infants in any setting. So thank you so very much for showing up, and let me know what you think about the read. And that's it. I'll see you all tomorrow, okay? Take it easy. Bye.